Before we get into this episode of CIA Declassified, we want to thank this video's sponsor, Conflict of Nations World War III. Conflict of Nations is a free-to-play online strategy game where you lead a real country through World War III. You can choose to forge alliances with other nations or expand your territory through brute force. Much like the CIA in this documentary, it will take all your might to defeat the enemy, who use tanks, jets and nuclear submarines against up to 128 other players in real-time battles that can last for weeks. Not only that, you can play on PC or mobile with the same account. So, if you love strategy games, you can claim a very special offer for Real Stories viewers. Click the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. But hurry, this offer is only available for the next 30 days. Now, on to the documentary.
The bombing of the USS Cole. It is one of the first of a series of deadly strikes by al-Qaida on US targets.
We had to avenge the 17 souls that perished in the USS Cole.
The organization responsible is quickly identified.
The only people out there who had anywhere close to this capability was al-Qaida.
But it'll take the best to find and stop the killers themselves.
We want to know their tactics, their techniques, their procedures, who's involved.
This is the top-secret story of how the CIA used cutting-edge technology in one of the most inhospitable regions in the world to hunt down the terrorist mastermind behind the attack on the USS Cole and deliver lethal justice.
Abu Ali was the godfather, the head of the snake that needed to be decapitated.
In a country where it's easy to hide and impossible to search.
Finding a bunch of guys in the most rugged, forbidding territory I've ever seen.
Highly tribal areas, the tribes were armed to the teeth.
Yeah, it's going to be hard.
It's a sultry morning in the port town of Aden, in Yemen, the Arab world's poorest country. Aden's location on the southern tip of the region makes it useful as a refueling point for US vessels starting a tour of duty. From year to year, little happens here to grab the world's attention. Today, the USS Cole, an American warship with 220 sailors on board, has come into Aden to refuel before heading off on a training exercise. It's nearly 11 a.m. The harbour is busy with small boats and skiffs selling everyday wares to the passing fleets. Then one of them approaches the Cole. Its smiling occupants wave at the sailors.
Very early morning on the 12th of October, 2000, I received a telephone call, and it was my good friend and colleague, Special Agent Randy Hughes. And he had told me in a very excited voice, dude, turn on the TV.
Morning, a U.S. destroyer sits crippled in a Yemen harbor.
And there on the screen was breaking news.
Target of a terrorist attack.
A U.S. warship in the port of Aden had experienced an explosion.
It's more than an explosion. A suicide bomb has ripped a 40-foot hole in the hull of the Cole, nearly sinking the ship.
The latest figures are 7 dead, 10 missing, and 38 wounded.
Eventually, the death toll rises to 17, with 39 injured. Back in the US, the families of the dead and injured struggle to make sense of the first attack of its kind in US military history.
If it turns out that this is a terrorist act, as it appears to be, but certainly the investigation will prove that, and any leads on who might have done it will be followed wherever they go.
To most people, this is an incomprehensible crime. But to a small number of experts in the FBI and the CIA, it's got all the hallmarks of a terrorist attack. Prime suspect, al-Qaida. And the largely lawless mountains and deserts of Yemen is one of its favorite hiding places. With alarm bells ringing across the Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI, the Naval Criminal Investigation Service, and the military send in plane loads of their best teams. Special Agent Bob McFadden is a seasoned operator in the Middle East with long stints of service in Bahrain and a command of fluent Arabic. He's summoned to Yemen to join a task force of investigators.
The word was to pack my bags for about 10 days, and 10 days wound up being the better part of 2 years.
And they have just one mission objective: find the killers of America's 17 sailors and bring them to justice.
Words fail us, but our feelings are pure.
And only now can all the details of that extraordinary mission be told. For it would be a mission that would test the CIA to its limits and involve every counterterrorism agency in the US.
I get word that some of the U.S. government support elements are starting to come into Aden. So I go down to Aden Airport to meet what I think is a relatively small group of people. And there's about 7 U.S. government planes of different varieties that had landed at the airport, and I didn't know they were coming in. The Yemenis didn't know they were coming in. No one had told the Yemenis that what looked like a small invasion force was going to be coming in. At its height, we were somewhere around 350 people.
When investigators arrive, the USS Cole is listing heavily. And they have to move fast to gather what evidence they can from the stricken vessel before it sinks.
Seeing the news clips of the ship is one thing, but then actually seeing it and being aboard the ship is another altogether. Very emotional, visceral. The sights, the sounds, the smells of destruction and decay is just remarkable.
It looked like a wounded animal. There was something horrific about a ship that mortally wounded and yet still somehow struggling to stay afloat. It should have sunk. It didn't.
Aden's local police start mass arrests, seizing anyone they suspect. And from eyewitness evidence, very quickly figure out the basics of how the operation was carried out.
They were able to identify the launching spot of the skiff that attacked the ship. They were able to identify very early on the compound where the bomb in the skiff had been assembled. So they were able to do a lot of those basics pretty quickly.
Now, hundreds of US detectives from the CIA, the FBI, and the Naval Criminal Investigation Service get to work with ferocious energy.
There truly was a 24-hour operation, and it was an exceptional working element among all those different agencies. There's so much to do, so many tasks to take care of. Setting up the communications and technicians, setting up comms, secure comms with Washington, getting facsimiles up, getting internet connectivity for unclass and then various levels of classified systems.
The army of investigators is led by an extraordinary boss who commands fierce loyalty among his team. John O'Neill, one of America's top experts on a terrorist who few at this point have heard of, called Osama bin Laden, and the shadowy group he commands called al-Qaida. O'Neill leads his massive team from the front, working tirelessly to deliver results.
Bigger-than-life personality, very confident, articulate, very personable, very, very quick on his feet, and truly someone who has a natural multitasking capability.
Gathered around O'Neill is a team of the best intelligence officers in the US. And leading them is a Lebanese PhD called Ali Soufan, one of the few investigators who speaks fluent Arabic.
Ali Soufan is someone with Arabic skills. You know, not just with language, but a lot of the unspoken things, a lot of the cultural things that might not go into a bureaucratic report, but that make a lot of difference in building personal relationships.
The CIA believe that the men they want are al-Qaida. But finding the individuals in Yemen who carried out the crime seems an enormous challenge at this stage. All they have is scraps of evidence and eyewitness testimony. Then, Soufan and McFadden make a connection with another terrorist crime 2 years earlier in the East African country of Kenya. There, 2 simultaneous attacks on US embassies in 1998 killed over 200 people and wounded 4,000.
As President Clinton has indicated, we're going to conduct an intensive, unending, and unyielding investigation to bring the perpetrators to justice.
Now FBI and CIA operatives from the East Africa investigation are sent in to help O'Neill and the US team in Yemen. They bring expertise that confirms beyond doubt the Cole was bombed by al-Qaida.
Very experienced investigators, special agents, detectives came to Yemen with a deep experience and knowledge of al-Qaida and its modus operandi, how it put together the cell for East Africa, what kind of tactics they used, what kind of safe houses they rented, how they went about getting the explosives.
The East Africa team points out similarities in bomb-making techniques, planning methods, concealment strategies and team structures between the embassy bombings they've been investigating and the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen.
You have a core element that we're saying over and over again, remarkable similarities to how the East Africa dual attacks occurred.
And sure enough, when names surfacing in connection with the USS Cole attack are shown to investigators with knowledge of the East African embassy bombings, matches are made.
Some of the same names that were involved in East Africa, facilitators and others that were at large, their names were coming up very early on in the Cole investigation.
There's now no doubt left in the minds of the investigators. It has to be al-Qaida. What they need is the local cell, the Yemenis who set up and carried out the attack on the ship. And then there's a breakthrough. Yemeni police recover a hat from the site of the explosion.
The Yemenis were able to find a cap from one of the bombers that had some hair, that had some DNA. Pretty soon, we had a pretty good idea of who was responsible for setting up this attack.
With the DNA evidence, the name of one of the suicide bombers is confirmed. And from that, a network of local associations emerges. Suspected members of the al-Qaida cell in Yemen are brought in and interrogated. Soufan and McFadden interview 2 men who turn out to be junior operators in the attack. It looks like the investigation is on a roll. And from these 2 men, the US teams extract the name of the organizer, the leader of the cell. He's not a Yemeni. He's a wealthy young Saudi who is constantly on the move around Africa and the Middle East. His name is Abdul Nashri. With this vital piece of new information, the investigators are ready to close in and shut down the cell that killed the 17 US sailors. Justice seems within reach. But then, there's a problem. To get Abdul Nashri, investigators know they are entirely dependent on the cooperation of the Yemeni authorities. But soon, Yemeni officials begin to put up obstacles.
There was a decision somewhere within the chain of command of Yemeni authorities that put a halt to the interview of the witnesses. It was probably not for at least 2 weeks until myself and investigator counterparts were able to re-interview witnesses that the Yemeni investigators had already interviewed.
The cooperative attitude of the Yemen government is rapidly evaporating. And then the US team loses its charismatic leader. The frustrated John O'Neill is called back to the US and then leaves the FBI to take up a new job as head of security at the World Trade Center. It's been 33 days since the attack on the Cole. And the US team is confronted with some devastating intelligence. Cell phone intercepts by CIA analysts indicate that Nashri has set into motion another attack. This time, his target is the investigators themselves.
I received a call from the NCIS Multiple Threat Alert Center and said, you need to stand by, there's some very significant threat reporting coming in. This was actually a cell coming a-gunning for the investigative element led and directed by Abdurrahim Nashri. A decision was made very, very quickly to pare down the investigative element to a core of 50.
Orders come from Washington for the whole investigative force to pull out of Yemen, and a small core team is evacuated to a warship moored far out at sea. From there, the team learns further details of the planned assault.
There was consistent reporting that there was a cell or cells that would try to conduct some kind of breaching operation where the U.S. element was.
Sure enough, the method of the terrorists mirrors exactly that of the bombers of the East Africa embassies 2 years earlier.
There is a main vehicle with high explosives that is essentially the ramming vehicle, improvised explosive device that breaches the perimeter, and then there are other vehicles with attackers with weapons, RPGs, explosives, just trying to shoot and kill anybody in sight.
But to stand any chance of catching the bombers, the investigation has to be brought back from the warship to Yemen. And with massively increased security, the team returns to Aden.
The investigation had to go on. Very smart people made a decision that our security and other safeguards and measures were in place. And so, quite fortunately, we were able to continue and still restart the investigation.
Soufan and McFadden know that to get the quality of intelligence they need, only meticulous preparation and careful psychology will work.
The way we approach interview and interrogation is a rapport, a relationship-based approach, a cerebral approach, and that starts with getting any and all information available from any source about the subject of the interview. And going in with a plan, but also being able to turn on the dime if our plan's not going as anticipated. Does it mean he's going to say, you have me, here's everything? But no, think of it in terms of, say, a helicopter making concentric circles around a target. And you tend to revisit these topics when he's comfortable. And then us establishing up front that we know an awful lot of information about him.
In a classic maneuver of interrogation psychology, the investigators develop sincere relationships with their interviewees, who soon have to reciprocate to preserve their self-respect. And with that come the first pieces of reliable intelligence.
He doesn't want to lose face by continually lying or deceiving, so he's going to have to give up bits of information so he can at least stay somewhere within his circle of comfort. And so working on that at a consistent, professional, and cerebral basis with him day in and day out. Within the first week, we had already opened up a channel of highly reportable and actionable information about the al-Qaida structure, its command structure, its communication methodology, its capability and different weapon systems.
And then there's a breakthrough, and the Americans make a discovery that has massive implications for the investigation. They find out that the attack on the Cole was not the first al-Qaida attempt to blow up a US naval warship in 2000. 9 months earlier, just days after the Millennium New Year's Eve, an identical plot almost succeeded against another US naval vessel, the USS The Sullivans, but the operation was abandoned when the attack boat flooded by accident. Until now, investigators believe that the mastermind of the Cole bombing was a Saudi called Abdul Nashri, operating with just a tiny group of extremists. The additional intelligence connecting a second plot to attack a US ship points to the presence of a larger cell in Yemen, one that would require a Yemeni leader. Further interrogations yield a new name.
Well, Abu Ali al-Harithi was the godfather for al-Qaida in Yemen, or the emir of the Yemeni branch of al-Qaida. So he was the head of the snake that needed to be decapitated.
Abu Ali al-Harati is even more dangerous and determined than Abdul Nashri, and has a long history of terror operations all over the world.
He's one of what we would call sort of the first generation of jihadis. He fought in Afghanistan in the late 1980s. He was close to Osama bin Laden, building up camps within Yemen, as well as the fact that he had military training. So this is an individual who is able to combine a lot of different skills.
As they find out more about him, the US investigators realize that if nailing Nashri was going to be hard, tackling Harati will be far more difficult. A hardened survivor with deep roots in Yemen society, he has the protection of a fierce and heavily armed tribe in a remote part of the country. McFadden and Soufan realize that to get al-Harati, they are going to have to penetrate Yemen's badlands. Wild places where even Yemen's army daren't go.
Yemen is a very mountainous country with expansive areas where the government is not present. That rugged terrain makes it very difficult to establish control. It's very similar to the situation in Afghanistan. The tribes are extremely strong.
CIA investigators know that with the help of special forces and airstrikes, hunting Harati down might be possible. But Yemen's president has forbidden the US military and the CIA from going outside the country's major cities. And he's unwilling to risk a confrontation with the tribes by sending in his own troops. Al-Harati is not only beyond the reach of the US investigators, but the Yemen government forces as well. As a compromise, President Saleh suggests a diplomatic solution to tackle al-Harati, and reluctantly, the Americans agree.
He went into endless negotiations with Abu Ali directly, trying to get Abu Ali to surrender himself with some guarantees that he wouldn't be handed over to the Americans. But it seemed to us pretty clear that these negotiations were sham, that Abu Ali never really intended to do so.
As the investigation drags on into 2001, it's obvious the bombers of the USS Cole have disappeared into the sands of Yemen's deserts and mountains, and the investigation is going nowhere. Then one day in September changes everything.
I've ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
In Yemen, McFadden and Soufan are working the phones, trying to get any information they can on the whereabouts of friends and relatives, and become increasingly concerned about the one man who knew all about al-Qaida from the start, their former boss and mentor, John O'Neill, now head of security at the World Trade Center, and only 11 days into his new job. When they have a routine meeting with a senior Yemeni official, they break the news that they believe their former boss has been murdered by the very people he was sent to Yemen to track down.
We told him that his good friend and brother, as he called him, Brother John O'Neill, was missing and presumed dead. At that point, when Ali was conveying in Arabic to the general as to what happened, we had a really quite emotional meeting. Both the realization of this profound event, the attack of 9/11, and that someone like John O'Neill missing and presumed dead in the attack. I mean, one of the great ironies you could ever describe.
With al-Qaida now the single greatest threat to US national security, Yemen becomes a front line in the war on terror. Yemen's President Saleh knows that his country is a hotbed of terrorist extremism and closely associated with al-Qaida and Osama bin Laden. He's in the spotlight, and America is piling on the pressure.
Either you are with us, or you are with the terrorists.
President Saleh is incredibly worried about what's about to happen. He knows that Afghanistan is sort of the US's #1 target. But after that, there's a lot of loose speculation that Yemen might be next.
Very quickly, Saleh clears his schedule for a visit to the US and a meeting with President Bush.
He's been clamoring for a trip to the United States. This is what he really wants, to go to have a one-on-one meeting with President Bush and explain, look, whatever you need to do, I'm here to help you. Just don't bomb Yemen.
Saleh came to Washington, met with all of the significant leaders, Director of the FBI, Secretary of Defense, Colin Powell, and then finally President Bush himself in the Oval Office.
It was cards on the table. It was, you're either with us or against us. Saleh didn't really have much of a choice. I mean, he could have told the US he wasn't interested in their friendship, but then there'd probably been an invasion.
We spent a lot of time talking about our mutual desire to bring radicals and murderers to justice.
The two men, both very originals, had a candid discussion about al-Qaida and the threat. And they reached a man-to-man agreement.
And I thank the President for his strong support in this war against extremists and terrorists.
And it was on that basis, really, that we built the next 3 years of active cooperation.
Shukran. Shukran. Shukran.
Behind the smiles for the cameras, the tough realities of the US requirement from Saleh are unmistakable. At a meeting with CIA chiefs, President Saleh is handed a list of the terror suspects most wanted in his country. At the top of the list is Abu Ali al-Harati. Within hours, an order comes from President Saleh to give the USS Cole investigation back in Yemen whatever they want.
If you talk about a watershed event, there was a sea change in attitude. Any individual we need access to, unfettered interviews of card-carrying al-Qaeda members.
But as well as orders, Yemen's president gets backup. Days after his trip to Washington, Congress authorizes a massive package of counterterrorism aid for Yemen, and taking the lead is the CIA. At the center of the package is the establishment of a training camp led by 100 special forces from the Marines, the Navy SEALs, and units from the Joint Special Operations Command.
Paramilitary operatives, contract officers working for the CIA, former Green Berets or U.S. Navy SEAL commandos, go places and do things that your standard CIA field operative is just not trained to do. They set up a base to train a Yemeni counterterrorism battalion.
The CIA's classified mission is to help Yemen's special forces find and take out as many al-Qaida operatives as possible. And al-Harati is the top priority. Supporting the special forces is a top-secret group of communications and CIA intelligence specialists known as the Activity. They come ready to spy on cell phone, satellite phone and landline networks and quickly start harvesting a wealth of data for analysis in the US. On top of that, the investigation starts making the best possible use of President Saleh's increased openness and cooperation.
The Yemenis handed over to us a vast amount of information and evidence which we were then able to send to the United States for processing. So that whole investigation got a real jolt.
Now, with unfettered access to interrogate anyone they want, the CIA-led team develops a vastly richer array of new information about al-Qaida in Yemen.
Having access was tremendous, night in and night out. It was a veritable assembly line of reporting of useful intelligence information.
Even with this increased level of intelligence, al-Harati remains out of reach in the tribal backcountry of Yemen's Empty Quarter, an area as impenetrable as Tora Bora in Afghanistan. The key to locating Abu Ali al-Harati is the Yemeni president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, and all eyes are on him to deliver. President Saleh takes one of the biggest gambles of his career. He decides to take on the tribes in a military confrontation to get al-Harati and to do it with his own troops. It's something he has never dared do before, but he's determined to show he's in control and to assert his authority over the tribes.
Shortly after President Saleh arrived back in Yemen, he sent out a group of Yemeni forces about 100 miles east of the capital in an attempt to capture what at the time was believed to be Abu Ali al-Harati.
Saleh's troops are far from familiar territory and face a heavily armed opposition of experienced fighters.
There was a confrontation between the government forces and the tribal forces. And indeed, 18 Yemeni soldiers were killed in that operation. There was Yemeni blood on the ground in the attempt by Saleh to redeem his pledge from the Oval Office.
Saleh not only fails to capture al-Harati, but shows the world he's not in control of his own country. With the president floundering, intelligence comes in that al-Qaida in Yemen is about to make the most of his weak grip on security and the shock created by 9/11.
Al-Harati and the rest of them were as surprised by September 11th as the rest of us. So for them, they had no idea that al-Qaida was planning this. And so when it happened, then they had to reorganize. Everything that they'd known, the world had changed.
And to anticipate any counter-terrorism initiatives, al-Harati now starts a campaign of violence far in excess of anything ever seen before in the country.
In late 2001 and early 2002 was this organization, al-Qaida in Yemen, trying to reorganize, make sense of a world that had changed dramatically around them, where all of a sudden, instead of laying low, carrying out one big attack, now they're just fighting for their lives. And in doing that, they lashed out and they carried out a lot of different attacks, which at the time, I think led a lot of different analysts, both in the United States as well as in Yemen, to think that the group was much, much bigger than it actually was.
Impotent and confined largely to the cities, all Saleh's security forces can do is arrest anyone they suspect and detain them for long periods. A strategy which yields few results.
The Yemeni government has just arrested a vast number of people and thrown them all in prison in the hope that the guilty would rise to the surface and they'd be able to give the Americans some of what it is that the U.S. appeared to want.
It was very, very intense during that period. It was really a crescendo of us raising our game to try to disestablish al-Qaida, and al-Qaida, with the flush of success from 9/11, raising their game, drive us out of Yemen and to intimidate the Yemeni government. Through that first year, it was very touch and go about which side was going to prevail.
Ever since the attack on the Cole, Yemen's two main ports have been closely watched by the security services. But they've ignored a third smaller port that is occasionally used by oil tankers. And then Soufan and McFadden get intelligence that al-Harati is about to exploit a security weakness in Yemen's counter-terrorism strategy.
Ali had just composed an information report, an intelligence report. And in that, he talked about information we had put together that strongly indicated that a maritime attack was imminent.
2 days after Soufan's warning, and before Yemen's security forces can act, a small boat, laden with explosives, approaches a French oil tanker. The attack kills one sailor and spills thousands of barrels of oil into the sea.
When we first heard about it, we knew without any doubt whatsoever that this was the next planned attack on a ship, in this case a large French-flagged tanker.
It's a reminder of just how free al-Qaida is to operate in Yemen. Nearly 2 years since the attack on the Cole. And once again, all fingers point to al-Harati and his network.
The FBI was gradually, methodically accumulating evidence. The Yemeni government itself issued a white paper to the parliament during this period, which laid out a lot of the details of the terrorist activity, including the attack on the merchant vessel Limburg, the French oil tanker. And Abu Ali's fingerprints were on those operations. He had acquired and transferred the explosives, for example, for the attack on the Limburg, as he was involved in the Cole attack as well. So his fingerprints were all over this plotting, and he remained at the top of our list of people that we had to deal with to protect ourselves.
But with each successive attack, the CIA are learning more and more about how its godfather, the lead terrorist Abu Ali al-Harati, operates.
We were conferring every day with the special element that was in Yemen. And they were working very hard, 24 hours a day, to establish communications procedures, using the best technology and information available to track Abu Ali al-Harati and those he was with.
The information war on al-Qaida in Yemen is quickly accelerating. But no one is ready for al-Harati's most dangerous plot yet. It's a hot afternoon in a suburb of Yemen's capital, Sana'a. And al-Harati is busy with preparations in a safe house for an operation on a target he's been meaning to hit for years. But then, one of his fighters accidentally triggers a rocket-propelled grenade, setting off an explosion that kills one and wounds another. The explosion alerts the Yemen police, who call on the Americans for assistance. And then with the CIA signals specialists known as the Activity, they move in. Inside the safe house, the Activity finds a treasure trove of information left by the bombers. Laptops, cell phones, and lists of names. Crucially, they obtain a wealth of detail about the satellite phones used by the cell and its conspirators. It's as good as having the contacts book of the Godfather himself. And then they find out what Harati had been planning.
When we put the intelligence pieces together, we ultimately concluded that the target of the attack was a missile attack against the U.S. Embassy.
CIA investigators now realize that al-Qaida is facing a problem in its Yemen operations. They're placed directly into the hands of the US. All the planning needed for his multiple plots means far greater communication is needed, and that is giving much greater scope for surveillance.
The problem with Mr. Harati is that he loved to chat on the telephone. He was hiding out in what they call the empty quarter. Now, the problem with sat phones are that they're incredibly easy to intercept. Every time you press the talk button, it's like a giant invitation to the world's electronic eavesdroppers to listen in on what it is that you're saying.
Sat phones don't just give away what you say, but also show where you are. Because they link to satellites, they act like a GPS, and anyone with the right equipment can pick up your position.
As soon as the phone is turned on, NSA, through a series of classified technical means, can locate the person holding that phone. It's called in the business geolocation.
The National Security Agency in Fort Meade, Maryland, is now getting routine fixes on Harati's position in Yemen and feeds it to the CIA.
NSA identified Harati's telephone number and put him under 24/7 watch. It's what in the business they call cast iron coverage, meaning there's some guy listening to that telephone number 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
If the CIA can work with Yemen's army and send in a ground force or airstrike, al-Harati can be easily taken out. And then just as investigators are closing in, al-Harati discovers his sat phone is revealing his location, and he stops using it. No one has any idea where he is or where he'll strike next. But everyone knows it won't be long before he does. But the CIA have one certainty they can rely on. Al-Harati's radio silence puts a huge strain on his ability to organize multiple plots. And so he has to travel a great deal more to talk to his conspirators. The CIA know that to reveal his whereabouts, the terrorist only has to weaken once and resort to using his phone. And so it waits and watches, hoping al-Harati will take a risk.
In November 2002, al-Harati is out in the desert with several members of al-Qaida. They had to come and meet face-to-face to have these different meetings. They were carrying out one of these, and one of al-Harati's phones rings, and he's been very disciplined for a very long time about not answering his phone. And for whatever reason, he answered the phone. And he immediately knew it was a mistake. He didn't stay on the phone particularly long, but he stayed on long enough for the intelligence analysts at the NSA in Fort Meade in Maryland to get a lock on him. And that was then relayed to different teams on the ground.
Harati reveals his location in a moment of carelessness. Just one call, and the NSA is locked on. Analysts in Washington quickly gather to review their options. Taking out Harati with a team of Navy SEALs or other special forces would be the preferred option.
Bouncing around in a Land Rover in the backwoods of eastern Yemen with a minimal escort, if the Yemeni government was willing to give us permission to send in a team of special forces operators, it would have been easy to eliminate his bodyguard and capture him.
But there's one big obstacle to a ground attack. The president of Yemen, Abdullah Saleh, has ruled out US forces putting boots on the ground.
The only option left to us was an airstrike. Now, President Saleh didn't want American fighter bombers flying over Yemeni airspace, which left basically an unmanned drone as the only option left to us.
Until now, an armed drone has only been used once to take out a terrorist. The decision now is to assassinate al-Harati with the new technology, something that has never been done before in the Arab world.
There had been an executive order which allowed the use of drones to kill terrorists, effectively, and the implication was al-Qaida terrorists. And that had happened relatively recently.
With al-Harati pinpointed and a presidential order in place authorizing his killing, the decision to use a drone armed with a missile is given the green light, and the CIA's well-rehearsed plan is put into action.
As soon as the order came in, a classified message went to the commander. 2 Predator drones, both armed with Hellfire missiles, were sortied from the base, took off, flew into Yemeni airspace, and just sat there and waited for NSA to tell the controllers where their target was located. The drone can fly up to 10,000 feet in the air and just sit there, flying lazy circles in the air, waiting for your target to appear. They can stay in the air up to 25 hours at a time.
The CIA's drone operators now track the vehicle containing al-Harati. They're assisted by Yemen special forces observing and following from a distance. With the Predator drone directly above the target, the operator releases a Hellfire missile.
The time had come to show that the US would not allow al-Qaida to crop up on different fronts, that if you're going to attack the United States, there were going to be consequences of that. And I think actually the attack on Abu Ali was probably a conglomeration of all of those things.
In November 2002, the strike on Abu Ali al-Harati is the first time, at least the first recorded time, that we have of the U.S. using a drone outside of a declared battlefield. So it was a very big moment, not only for the U.S. war against al-Qaida, because killing Abu al-Harati sort of, cut off the head of al-Qaida in Yemen, but also for U.S. technology.
With al-Harati out of action, al-Qaida in Yemen is left fragmented and weak.
It was a country that had had violent Islamism, including al-Qaida, since at least the early 90s. It goes all the way up to 2002, and then with the death of Abu Ali, it suddenly stops. It's one of the very few cases in which a drone strike did exactly what it's meant to, which is decapitate an organization. If you take out the top of an organization, you leave the rest of it without an authority to control it, to tell it what to do. But it just kind of crumbles in on itself and fades. In this case, it did work very well.
The CIA strike on al-Harati is a textbook operation. It goes down in history as one of the most successful drone operations of its kind. For the next 3 years, top-secret signals technology combined with advanced intelligence gathering across the Arab world leads to operations that seize Abdul Rahim Nashri and 13 others. All are jailed. Al-Qaeda is put out of business. And Yemen is closed down as Osama bin Laden's next place of refuge. Beirut, 1985.
A car apparently packed with explosives blew up at the entrance to the embassy.
Terrorists are targeting Americans in a series of deadly attacks. Hundreds are dead. And now the CIA's top man in the Middle East has been taken hostage. William Casey, the head of the CIA, decides to throw out the rulebook and strike back.
He wanted to take revenge.
It was totally an off-the-books operation.
In a top-secret mission still denied by the American government, Casey allegedly sanctions the assassination of the man he believes is responsible for the attacks on Americans.
Bill Casey was convinced that Fadlallah was the force behind Hezbollah.
He determined this was a leading terrorist and they were going to get him.
And on March the 8th, 1985, the assassins strike.
It was a car bomb.
They took it into Fadlallah's neighborhood, hoping to kill him.
Based on briefings with the former head of the CIA, this is the top secret story of the Beirut car bomb. (1983), Beirut, Lebanon. The capital of this tiny Middle Eastern country is being devastated by years of conflict. Now, American troops are arriving in the city. Their mission, not to invade, but to bring peace. Also in the city is a substantial CIA presence. Operating out of the US Embassy, the agents are there to counter a growing problem in Beirut: terrorism. A top-secret meeting has been called to discuss the threat. Chairing the meeting will be the CIA's top Middle East analyst, Robert Ames.
He is a man who was considered to be the key analyst of terrorist organizations and Middle East politics.
Bob Ames was probably the most knowledgeable person in the Middle East.
Ames had previously infiltrated the PLO and has been brought into Beirut secretly to advise on the terrorist threat. Also in the building that day is aid worker Ann Damerel.
When you work in an embassy, everyone knows that CIA agents are there. What you may not know is who they are.
As the classified CIA meeting is gathering, a white van is winding through the Beirut streets to the embassy.
Very few people saw what was coming. It was the calm before the storm.
The funny thing about living in Beirut when I was there, I never dreamt that I would be targeted.
It didn't look like a threat. It kind of took everybody off guard.
The driver manages to enter the embassy compound's basement garage. The entire central section of the embassy building collapses in the explosion, bringing down 7 stories of masonry and rubble. Ann Damerel is one of those trapped beneath the wreckage.
I couldn't move anything. I heard, "Yalla bina, yalla bina," let's go, let's go. And I was aware that there were 4 young Lebanese near me. They made like a board, and they moved me out. And they started to run with me across the garden.
Anne's rescue is captured on video. She is one of the lucky ones. "200 people are wounded in the attack. 63 are killed, 17 of them American." News of the embassy bombing rocks America.
CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. The U.S. Embassy in Beirut tonight is a floodlit scene of death and devastation. Much of the 7-story building is rubble, and in that rubble, possibly more victims of a massive terrorist car bomb. The Pentagon says 1 U.S. Marine and 2 U.S. Army soldiers are...
I'm a young Marine then, and I watched this on the news, and my thoughts were, wow, I'm on my way over there.
The embassy being bombed was definitely a shock. I don't think anybody had any idea the kind of defense an embassy really needed against the kind of bombs that could be put together, particularly when you have people willing to die delivering them.
This cowardly act has claimed a number of killed and wounded.
It appears that there are some American casualties, but we don't know yet the exact number or the extent of injury.
For the CIA, it is a particularly devastating blow. Half the American dead worked for the agency.
If you look at it from the bomber's point of view, it was an enormous success. It wiped out the CIA station, killed Bob Ames.
His loss was devastating, and the director of the CIA said that Bob Ames was as close to an irreplaceable man as he had ever known in U.S. intelligence.
That director of the CIA is William Casey, and Casey is taking it personally.
Well, Casey obviously was a very intelligent guy. He was a risk taker, and that's different from being a gambler.
He was a very intimidating person if you were afraid of him. He was, had a very short temper. He didn't suffer fools lightly.
In many respects, he was a wild man. He had really no time for the moderates, you know, the make nice people.
Casey directs every CIA resource available to hunt down those responsible for the attack on the US Embassy.
Under CIA Director Casey, the CIA is probably more sophisticated than it ever had been in its history.
Analysts are charged with reviewing thousands of intercepts. Agents are ordered to go to their informants, and dozens of emergency meetings are called for senior CIA officials. But before Casey can get the enemy in his sights, they strike again. Their target? Over 1,800 American Marines stationed in Lebanon as peacekeepers.
The United States had made a decision to put its troops in Lebanon to help stabilize that country.
We were there acting as a liaison between the Lebanese government and the warring militias until the Lebanese government could get on their feet.
They weren't sent there to fight a war. They were to keep the peace. It was a peacekeeping mission.
The majority of the forces are based in barracks situated next to Beirut Airport.
From the rooftop of the building, we could see the main terminal and the mountains and the Mediterranean Sea to the right.
Their position is also dangerously close to an area of Beirut controlled by Muslim militias.
Where it was located was not a choice position for its security.
In the early hours, a truck heads out of Muslim-controlled Beirut on the airport road towards the barracks. At the same time, Marine Lance Corporal Kevin Jiggets is signing off from guard duty.
I went down to my room in the building, and I remember just taking off my boots and laying down.
As Jiggets lies down to sleep, the van approaches the perimeter of the barracks.
This truck came down Airport Road. He turned into the parking lot of the main terminal, and he crashed through a barbed wire barrier.
As a peacekeeping force, the Marines' weapons are not loaded. The face of the driver is visible to the guards as he aims the truck at the barracks. He is smiling.
It drove into this big building that was a barracks.
The initial contact with the truck and the guard shack is what woke me up.
The truck rams into the base of the barracks and is primed to explode.
And I reached for my weapon when I said, "It's showtime, ladies," and that's the last thing I remember.
It is the largest non-nuclear explosion since the Second World War.
Upon detonation, the building was lifted from its foundation and kind of pancaked down floor after floor.
The entire building is leveled.
We had never seen anything like this. It was an iconic bombing.
The truck was laden with approximately 12,000 pounds of explosives.
It was a pretty simple thing, a very large vehicle packed with explosives, got up to the front of the barracks and was exploded. It wasn't very complicated.
It was a beautifully done operation.
The next thing I remember was 2 white Marines were removing rubble from me. I didn't feel any pain until they picked me up.
Both of Jiggett's legs are broken, and he suffers burns and cuts over his entire body. All that remains of the 9-story building is rubble.
Prior to 9/11, it was the largest terrorist attack against U.S. personnel in the history of the United States.
241 American soldiers were killed, 240 of them were Marines.
It is the biggest single loss of American servicemen's life since Iwo Jima.
I know there are no words that can express our sorrow and grief over the loss of those splendid young men. Likewise, there are no words to properly express our outrage, and I think the outrage of all Americans, at the despicable act.
In Washington, William Casey and the CIA are now under real pressure to find the terrorists. The problem is that no one has yet claimed responsibility. But within hours of the attack, a statement is released to a French news agency by a group calling themselves Islamic Jihad, Arabic for Holy War. The group say they are responsible for both the attack on the Marines and for another simultaneous attack in the city, which has claimed the lives of 58 French soldiers. But no one in Washington has ever heard of Islamic Jihad.
When the Islamic Jihad claimed the bombing, we knew absolutely nothing about it. It was not an organization that we even knew existed.
The CIA was caught completely off guard. We did not have the structure internally to handle that kind of threat.
We didn't know where it was, what it was. We didn't know who was behind it.
William Casey is determined that the CIA will find out and bring the perpetrators of this terrible crime to justice. And according to some, he will go beyond the law to do so. The man Casey selects to uncover those responsible is seasoned Middle East agent Robert Bayer. Anxious not to lose more operatives, Bayer's brief is simple.
When I left Washington, the orders were stay alive. Whatever you do, stay alive. We don't care if you ever send a report in. We don't care what you do. Just don't get killed or kidnapped. It was very simple orders.
Bayer sets off and finds Beirut a city in turmoil.
There was no other way in except a Black Hawk helicopter. We came in over the sea about 10 feet. The helicopter drops down so there's spray going everywhere. And you're coming in about 200 miles an hour. There's shelling. Parts of Beirut are burning. It was the ninth circle of hell.
Bayer and the other agents immediately begin to set up a low-profile operation.
This was Lebanon, you know? It was a civil war. You just absolutely wanted to be the least important person on the street. We didn't wear suits, always Levi's, scuff shoes. You never carried a radio in the open. You never carried a gun in the open. You looked like you were a bum that just sort of wandered off from wherever. We drove beat-up old cars with bullet holes in them, with bald tires. You know, if you change your car every day, that was the best way to do it. At one point, I actually drove a taxi there. It was an old Mercedes, it was been painted a bunch of time, all dinged up, and it looked like what's called a service. There were just no limits, no laws. It was amazing. We had all the money we wanted. We would, at the drop of a hat, buy an apartment. I had probably 12 apartments and houses and moved between them night after night. So you were never in the same place.
As a fluent Arabic speaker, Bayer is assigned the role of gathering intelligence on the streets.
It was mainly picking up sources in cars, and we would put surveillance on places watch people coming and going.
Gradually, Bayer's intelligence work starts to pay off. He begins to gather information on Islamic Jihad. And that intelligence leads him to the religious leaders of one of Lebanon's main Islamic sects, the Shias.
We knew that there was a grouping of Shia clerics that had started in 1982, and we watched this formation occur. You know, people would join and leave. Names we didn't know much about, but basically the religious establishment was coming to join in this Islamic resistance movement.
The Shia sect are in the minority in the Muslim world, but in Lebanon, they make up around half the Muslim population. And critically, they are the same branch of Islam as America's key enemy in the Middle East, Iran. Despite limitless CIA resources, Bayer's efforts to penetrate Islamic Jihad now hit a brick wall.
These people were very, very good. They never showed themselves. They worked out of tenements in Beirut. They didn't have a name, they didn't have an office, they didn't keep phone numbers.
What we began to find out was that they were very sophisticated in the structure of their organization, and in my opinion, they were almost as good as we are.
They were strictly family-based, impossible to penetrate.
So William Casey decides to turn to America's only friend in the region, Israel.
Israel is a very, very close ally, both politically and in intelligence areas, and so we work with them really as our intelligence and political brothers and sisters, really.
The Israeli intelligence service, Mossad, is conducting its own operations in Lebanon. Mossad pass on to Casey what they know. The Israeli report says that an organization inside Lebanon is involved. The Israelis identify a house in Damascus, the capital of neighboring Syria, where they say a Syrian intelligence officer discussed the attacks on the Marines 3 days before the bombing. Present at the meeting was a grandfatherly man with a black turban and brown robes. The Israelis say he is the key figure in the militant Shiite movement in Lebanon, Sheikh Mohammed Hussein Fadlallah.
The intelligence the CIA and the Israelis developed showed that Sheikh Fadlallah, a Shiite militant, was at the center and involved, allegedly, in at least the main bombings in Beirut, including the attack on the Marine barracks.
Fadlallah was born and raised in Iraq, but has spent his adult life in Lebanon. He is an open critic of America's presence in the region.
Mohammed Hussein Fadlallah naturally became a part of the anti-Western coalition, if you like. You know, he's an Ayatollah. He would give blanket fatwas saying, yeah, it's fine to use force to drive out an occupying power.
Casey becomes convinced that Fadlallah has to be connected to the bombings and is a leading figure in Islamic Jihad. At last, Casey has a target. According to some, Casey now sets in motion an operation to assassinate the man who he believes ordered the slaughter of hundreds of Americans. In the months after the barracks bombing, President Reagan reassures the world that America will stay the course.
The people of Lebanon must be given the chance to resume their efforts to lead a normal life, free from violence, without the presence of unauthorized foreign forces on their soil. And to this noble end, I rededicate the efforts of the United States.
But the truth is that neither the American military or the American people have any desire to be embroiled in another Vietnam.
The military decided that no longer were they going to let the politicians dribble them into a war, and a war that the public doesn't support.
I think the American public were sick of the killings.
But CIA Director William Casey is considering an operation against the Lebanese cleric Sheikh Mohammed Fadlallah, who he suspects is the leader of the terrorist organization behind the attacks on Americans. But before he can strike back, there is a further humiliation for America. Just 4 months after the bombing of the US Marines, America begins a full withdrawal of its forces from Lebanon. Many in the CIA believe it is sending the wrong message to the terrorists.
Pulling Marines out of Beirut was viewed as a victory by the bad guys, writ large.
It was sending a signal to terrorists in the region that the Reagan administration was a paper tiger.
Casey decides that it is up to the CIA to exact revenge for this loss of face.
Casey felt defeated because he was part of the administration that convinced Reagan to go in, to send the Marines in.
But to strike back, he must first rebuild the agency's damaged capabilities in Lebanon. Casey's first action is to send in a new station chief, William Buckley.
Buckley was a great man, a very solid fella. His expertise was in paramilitary operations.
Buckley, a former commando who had fought in Vietnam, will be the CIA's most important man on the ground in Beirut. Casey promises to provide Buckley with everything he needs to combat the terrorist threat posed by Islamic Jihad. Buckley steps up CIA paramilitary training, hostage rescue, and VIP protection. He trains Lebanese intelligence agents to work alongside his teams. Back at CIA headquarters in Langley, Casey has 50 highly trained analysts working exclusively on Islamic terrorism in the Middle East. Out of this massively expanded operation, Buckley and Casey learn a vital piece of intelligence.
It takes a lot of time to figure out what's going on. We figured that the Islamic Jihad was an organization that they just borrowed a name.
It emerges that Islamic Jihad is not a single body. It is the name for a loose network of Shiite militant groups. The CIA learns that just one of these groups is responsible for the attacks on American targets. That group will become one of the most dangerous and radical organizations to ever emerge from the Middle East. But in 1984, they are only just starting to refer to themselves by name. They call themselves the Party of God. In Arabic, Hezbollah.
Everybody talks about Hezbollah today. At the time, I never heard of Hezbollah.
In April 1983, we had no idea that there would be a Hezbollah. In fact, there was no name for it.
It is only now, after the bombings, that the group starts to use their notorious name. Hezbollah has been created by America's greatest enemy in the region, Iran. In 1982, its spiritual leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, had sent 1,000 Iranian Revolutionary Guards to train Shiite fighters in Lebanon.
Hezbollah was created by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. There's just no doubt about this. They funded it, they organized it.
And now Hezbollah is fighting Iran's war in Lebanon.
It was an extension of the Iranian Revolution, if you like. It was Iran's effort to open out the revolution to the Arab world. And they did it very successfully. And Lebanon was the first place.
the CIA discovers that Iran is training Hezbollah fighters on the Lebanese-Syrian border. Soon, they receive other vital intelligence. Both the Lebanese security forces and Israel's Mossad inform the CIA that a senior figure in the Hezbollah power structure is none other than Sheikh Mohammed Fadlallah. The same man who Casey believes is behind the attacks on the US Embassy and Marine barracks. Casey becomes convinced that the best way to strike at Hezbollah and send a clear signal to America's enemies is to kill Fadlallah. But Casey faces a complication. Targeted assassinations are against the law.
During Watergate, Gerald Ford, the president, issued an executive order banning assassinations by any agency, including the CIA. So in the 80s, Casey's hands were tied, and so he stretched the law.
In Washington, Casey turns to the CIA's formidable legal team to try to convince President Reagan to change the law. His argument is that a preemptive strike against Fadlallah should be seen as an act of self-defense.
In other words, if you'd gotten rid of Hitler in the 30s, maybe 20 million people wouldn't have died in World War II. And that's a pretty good argument.
Back in Beirut, William Buckley has a much more immediate problem to deal with. The terrorists have started taking hostages.
Hezbollah had started kidnapping individual Americans with a view to getting the United States out of the Middle East.
Groups of armed men are seizing Westerners, especially Americans, from the streets of Beirut. Casey realizes that the CIA needs to act. So Buckley starts formulating a daring rescue plan.
He wanted to set up paramilitary operations. He said, let's get people on the ground, let's get Delta Force there, we're going to rescue these people.
Buckley's plan is that the Green Berets and Israeli Special Forces will enter the city by boat under the cover of darkness. Simultaneously, in the city, Mossad agents will cause a diversion by placing bombs outside the homes of suspected Islamic terrorists. Then the Green Berets will make their way to a series of suspected locations and conduct stealth raids to rescue the hostages and take out the terrorists. Dangerous and daring though the plan is, Buckley believes that the very nature of such a surprise assault will be what ensures its success. On March the 15th, 1984, Casey gives Buckley the green light. But before he can put his plan into action, Hezbollah will strike again. And this time, the terrorists are coming after the CIA themselves. Since arriving in Beirut, Buckley has been having an affair with a beautiful young Lebanese woman called Zenoub. Unbeknown to Buckley, Zenoub works for Hezbollah. Monitoring every detail of Buckley's personal routine, she passes on the intelligence to the Hezbollah leadership.
Buckley was very predictable in his routine going to and from the embassy, and he was warned by a ranking military official to, look, stop doing that because you're putting yourself at risk.
Buckley ignores the warning, believing he is safe from attack and oblivious to Zenoub's true identity. On a Friday morning, William Buckley leaves his Beirut apartment, carrying top-secret documents. Taking the elevator to the basement garage, he is joined by a well-dressed man. In the basement, the man suddenly strikes.
They hit him over the head with a briefcase with something hard in it. They grabbed him, threw him in the back of a trunk of a car, and drove off into the southern suburbs.
For Casey, the kidnapping of the Beirut station chief is an unprecedented disaster.
This was a real earthquake for Casey and the CIA.
William Buckley was a chief of station and had volumes of CIA information in his head, in his memory. And the accounts were that Hezbollah was torturing Buckley daily.
In September, proof that Buckley is still alive is released to the CIA by his kidnappers.
There appeared eventually a video that Casey saw of Buckley being tortured.
He was almost dead. He was slobbering. You could barely understand what he was saying. The concern was the amount of classified information that was being tortured out of Station Chief Buckley. It was causing serious damage to national security.
Buckley's Lebanese agents began to vanish or turn up dead. With the loss of their station chief and their intelligence network in Lebanon clearly compromised, Casey fears the agency's entire operation in the Middle East is in ruins.
It showed the limits of American power. The United States was not able to protect its intelligence representatives abroad. And Hezbollah was able to hold this man, and the United States apparently couldn't do anything about it.
For one of their own to be tortured and killed that way, and then for the video to get to Casey and the CIA, it galvanized this idea of we have to fight back, and if our hands are going to be tied, if there are rules, if there are laws, if there are executive orders, to hell with them, we're going to get the job done.
And any doubt that Casey may have about hitting back at the terrorists is removed when they strike yet again. A Hezbollah car bomb targets the US Embassy Annex building. 24 are killed and 90 are wounded. But this time, the CIA link the attack to Hezbollah. Casey turns to remarkable top-secret CIA aerial photographs, which show a van identical to the one used in the attack at a Hezbollah training camp in the Lebanese desert. The photographs reveal an exact mock-up of the protective concrete barriers at the embassy annex, and between the obstacles, tire tracks.
If they looked carefully enough, the outline of the drive that had to be made was exactly what you saw right in front of the United States Embassy Annex in Beirut.
It is beyond doubt. The Iranians are running a car bomb school for Hezbollah terrorists. In Washington, Casey makes his position clear. They must cut off the head of the Hezbollah snake and kill the man they believe to be its leader, Sheikh Fadlallah.
In November of 1984, President Reagan signed something called a finding. A finding is a document that means the president has found that a certain top secret activity is in the interests of national security.
The finding does not mean that the CIA can carry out assassinations, but it does mean that they can train local units who potentially can. This gives Casey some room for maneuver. Casey can now sanction the killing, but the CIA must still not be directly involved. Veteran journalist Bob Woodward claims that this is precisely what Casey does next.
It was totally an off-the-books operation. The CIA was not directly involved, though Casey himself personally was.
Covert action has always been available to presidents when they do not wish to use the United States military.
According to Woodward, Casey hunts for a third party to execute the assassination.
William Casey looked elsewhere to find a partner to launch a strike against the leadership of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that partner was Saudi Arabia.
Although denied by Saudi Arabia and the American government, according to Woodward, in early 1985, the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the US, Prince Bandar, is ordered by his king to cooperate with Casey in every respect.
Casey and Bandar met in one of these classic CIA secret meetings at Bandar's house and walked out into the garden.
According to Woodward, the Saudis, like Casey, believe that Sheikh Fadlallah is the leader of Hezbollah, and so agree to fund the operation.
Casey gave Bandar a card with the bank account number and said, transfer the $3 million for this operation into this account.
Casey agrees to the Saudis taking operational control, and they agree to using a former British SAS officer to head the mission.
It was Saudi intelligence, a former SAS officer, and Casey, and they planned this operation.
The SAS officer arrives in Beirut. To keep the CIA out of the picture, he recruits Lebanese agents to carry out the mission.
The goal here was to get the Lebanese to do the work. Your boots on the ground, if you will, to try to find Hezbollah's leaders and deal with them.
The plan is simple: to strike at Fadlallah using the weapon of the terrorists.
You know, irony of ironies, made a car bomb.
One agent is ordered to procure a large quantity of explosives. Another is to choose the vehicle. Money is paid to informants to make sure that they know where Fadlallah will be at a certain time. The man chosen to drive the vehicle is Eli Habika, the leader of a Christian militia group. The bomb will be set off by a timed remote, which Habika will activate before leaving the scene. Everything is set. The team is given the green light, and the operation to kill Fadlallah is set in motion. A pickup truck is driven into the crowded Bir al-Abed neighborhood in South Beirut. Concealed beneath crates of vegetables, 750 pounds of explosives. The truck is parked across the road from Sheikh Fadlallah's house. Intelligence says that Fadlallah will soon be returning there from the mosque. Lookouts are positioned to alert the driver of the truck, Eli Habika, of Fadlallah's departure. At approximately 2 p.m., Fadlallah leaves the mosque after Friday prayers. One of the lookouts identifies Fadlallah, and the signal is relayed to Habika to prepare the bomb for detonation. But then a woman stops Fadlallah. She asks a religious question. They need to delay the detonation. Fadlallah is too far from the bomb. But it's too late. The blast kills 83 people. 283 lie wounded. The victims are mainly schoolgirls, women, and children. Buildings up to 600 feet away are destroyed. Despite the size of the explosion, the bombers have missed their target. Fadlallah is just outside the blast radius. Surrounded by his supporters, the cleric simply walks away.
They did not kill him. They killed 80 innocent people, and Fadlallah escaped.
Those at the scene are under no illusion as to who is behind the attack. At CIA headquarters, Casey receives word that the operation has gone horrifically wrong.
This bombing of Fadlallah was a turning point. I mean, anybody had any doubts about the West were immediately convinced that these guys are crazy. They're going to slaughter us and kill us all for no purpose at all.
And worse is to come. It later transpires that the CIA's intelligence on Fadlallah from Israeli and Lebanese sources is deeply flawed. The man the CIA had targeted for death is not the head of Hezbollah. Over the next few years, the agency learns that Fadlallah has never been involved in any terrorist attacks against America.
There was no evidence, none, zero at all, that he was directly involved in attacks on the West or Israel. He was not an active operational member of Hezbollah, never at any time.
To this day, Prince Bandar and both the Saudi Arabian and American governments deny any involvement in the attempt on Fadlallah's life. They say that rogue Lebanese militias undertook the operation alone. And those who worked alongside Casey at the highest levels of the CIA also claim he was not involved.
I think a lot of people have ascribed it to something that Casey put together with whatever, and that's not true. Casey had nothing to do with it.
Despite these public denials, it appears that William Casey himself is prepared for the story of his personal involvement to go public. In the years before his death in 1987, Casey agrees to a series of interviews with award-winning reporter Bob Woodward.
I met with Casey and talked to him 48 times. I talked to him on the phone, traveled with him on his CIA plane when I was the only one with him, had dinner with him in his house, had breakfast with him in his house.
Woodward eventually reveals Casey's involvement in the botched assassination attempt in his book, Veil, The Secret Wars of the CIA.
Now, why Casey would tell Bob Woodward this story, I don't know.
I think Casey talked to Woodward quite openly to leave a legacy behind and let people know what he wanted them to know.
Over the years, there has been speculation as to why Casey would talk to Woodward. Many people believe it was because Casey wanted to ensure that the CIA would learn from its mistakes in Beirut.
We underestimated our enemy in that case, and it came back to bite us.
Prior to 9/11, the terrorist attack on the Marine compound in 1983 was the largest terrorist attack against Americans in the history of the United States.
Because of intelligence failures in 1983, hundreds of Americans, including 241 Marines, lost their lives. It is a loss that many refuse to forget.
Beirut lives in the hearts of Beirut veterans because there's not been a day that's gone by that I don't think about it and I don't remember it.
Casey, too, was adamant that the deaths of the Marines, the CIA agents, and embassy staff who died in the previous bombing would not be in vain. The CIA desperately needed to employ more effective tactics against the extremists.
Casey figured out that we had to do something better about combating terrorism.
The critical lesson that Casey learned was that the CIA needed to find ways of getting better intelligence on its enemies and finding more accurate ways of killing them. So a year after the Fadlallah attack, Casey sets up a new CIA department, the Counterterrorism Center.
It brought together the espionage people and the people from the Directorate of Intelligence to work together for virtually the first time in history. And this was a revolution.
This revolution at the agency ensures that, unlike in Beirut, the CIA will now always try to have its own agents on the ground, providing highly accurate intelligence direct to the CIA's best analysts. They will no longer need to repeat the mistakes of Beirut, where they were forced to rely on foreign intelligence and local Lebanese to carry out their missions. In 1986, the Counterterrorism Center starts developing a new way to accurately target its enemies: an unmanned aerial vehicle.
That was the beginning of where we are today with the lethal drones. That was the genesis right there.
This idea, born out of a failure of such tactics as the car bomb, would result in the development of highly sophisticated, lethal drones. It would take a generation to be perfected, but drones are now an integral and highly effective weapon in the CIA's campaign against terrorism.
It is a new era, and if you think about what Casey was dabbling in with Sheikh Fadlallah, it's small change compared to what goes on now.
The CIA continues to evolve in the face of new terrorist threats and has achieved some startling successes. In many cases, the extent of those successes are only now becoming declassified.
Thank you to Conflict of Nations World War III for sponsoring this video. Remember, you can play right now for free, but if you download from our link in the description within the next 30 days, you can claim your free gift of 13,000 gold as well as 1 month premium subscription. The War Room is waiting. See if you have what it takes to lead your country to victory.